Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're taking a seriously high-stakes dive straight into the heart of warrior ethics, spiritual warfare, and the ultimate clash between paralyzing overanalysis and immediate action. We're going to look at ancient texts and epic narratives as if they were a cinematic masterpiece, breaking down the actual psychology of how battles are truly won.
So let's just jump right in. We're exploring some ancient Bushido concepts today, but through a biblical lens. And we've got to start with a question that has literally echoed across every battlefield in human history. What actually separates reckless bravado from true divine courage? I mean, anyone can puff out their chest, right? But true courage, the kind that alters history, well, that is rooted in something much, much deeper.
Now consider the concept of G. This translates to righteousness and right action. And here is the secret that most people totally miss. Righteousness isn't just about knowing what's right in your head. As the ancient text in Matthew 6 implies, it actually requires acting without hesitation. Think about it. A thought, no matter how noble it might be, remains completely powerless until you attach physical action to it. And that brings us to you. Now, this isn't just your standard earthly bravery. This is divine courage. It's the stark contrast between selfish, reckless bravado and a fire birthed from absolute conviction. You see, you exist solely to enforce Gi. It's not about ego at all. It's a mandate from something far greater swelling up inside you. Think about just the simple dread of facing a hard day. It's kind of like a microscopic form of fear, isn't it? Well, the text from 1 John tells us that fear has torment. But the source offers an ultimate countermeasure here. It argues that operating in perfect love completely drives that torment away. Basically, if your eyes are fixed on a higher calling, fear just runs out of oxygen. Part 1. Visualizing the threat. To truly understand this kind of courage, we need to look at the physical manifestation of fear in one of history's most epic narratives, the Champion of Goth. 9.5. That is how tall Goliath stood, 9.5 feet tall. In the ancient text, it's recorded as 6 cubits and a span. I mean, imagine stepping onto a battlefield and looking way up at a seasoned, brutal warrior towering over you. He cast this massive literal and psychological shadow over the entire, completely paralyzed army of Israel. Just his sheer physical presence was a weapon of mass intimidation. 125. That is the weight, in pounds, of his brass coat of mail. This is terrifying context when you realize that modern bulletproof steel body armor weighs only about 8 to 15 pounds. This giant was carrying 125 pounds of thick brass armor like it was absolutely nothing. He was a tank walking onto the battlefield, an immovable object just mocking an entire nation. Then there is his sheer, overwhelming strength. The iron head of his spear alone weighed 15 pounds. To put that into perspective for you, an Olympic shot put weighs about 16 pounds. And world-class athletes have to do a full-body spin just to throw that a few dozen feet. Goliath carried a spearhead roughly that weight on the end of a long wooden shaft, wielding it as a throwing weapon. Seriously, this was a champion that even other giants feared. So the contrast we see here is just staggering. On one side, you have an entire army of trained soldiers paralyzed by fear. They're doing exactly what we all do when we're terrified, right? Overanalyzing the physical odds, getting trapped in their own heads, and letting fear completely torment them. On the other side, though, you have a solitary guardian, a young shepherd boy fresh from the quiet solitude of the wilderness, completely anchored in simple faith.
Part 2. The solitary guardian. You see, David wasn't trained in elite military academies. His courage, his you, was forged in the unseen, lonely wilderness.
The text explains how David defended his sheep from a lion and a bear. And get this, he didn't form a committee or sit down to calculate the physics of the predator. Righteous action, G demanded he act instantly. He literally grabbed the beast by the beard and struck it down. His faith was actionable, visceral, and completely immediate. This creates a fascinating psychological turning point. The king tries to put his own heavy, worldly armor on the boy. But David rejects it. He says, "I cannot go with these, for I have not proved them." Instead, he chose a simple wooden staff and 5 smooth stones, fully trusting the tools his faith had already proven.
Part 3. The strike. So what happens when pure righteous conviction meets a terrifying physical threat? Let's take a look at immediate action under pressure.
The source shares an incredible modern parallel here. Imagine a teenager working at a pharmacy who suddenly sees a man trapped under the tire of a heavy van that was left in drive. Now, the teenager doesn't sit inside, sketch out a perfect rescue plan, or calculate the physics of the vehicle. No way. Righteous action demands he moves instantly. He runs out and physically lifts the crushing weight off the man to save his life. True action requires moving immediately when righteousness demands it, completely bypassing the paralysis of analysis.
And this modern parallel maps perfectly to the ancient tactical strike. David didn't just casually stroll onto the battlefield. The text explicitly says he hasted and ran directly toward the army to meet the giant. Think about the psychology there. By running toward the massive threat, he gave his own mind zero time to calculate fear. He forced the action.
Part 4. The Unseen Realm. It turns out this legendary underdog story was actually won in a completely different theater of war, the mind. The source draws on another epic narrative to explain this, the prophet Elisha, who is surrounded by an enemy army. His servant wakes up absolutely terrified, exactly like the paralyzed army of Israel. But Elisha, he doesn't panic. He just prays for his servant's eyes to be opened. And suddenly, the servant sees the mountains are full of invisible horses and chariots of fire. The narrative suggests that the true backing of our divine courage is often completely invisible to the natural eye. This concept is mirrored over in 2 Corinthians chapter 10. The text warns that even though we walk in the flesh, we do not war after the flesh. The true battlefield is the imagination. It's those strongholds and terrifying scenarios we constantly play on a loop in our heads. The instruction here is to ruthlessly cast down these giant, fearful thoughts long before you ever face the giant in reality.
According to the source, this is exactly where divine courage, originates. It doesn't come from your own physical strength or having heavy armor. It comes from yielding to a greater spirit within. It's that profound realization that this inner power is mathematically and spiritually far superior to the massive threat standing right in front of you.
And that brings us to the ultimate conclusion found in 1 John 5:4. The text asserts that it is simply impossible to overcome the world without simple, actionable faith. We're talking about a faith that refuses to be intimidated by a 9.5-foot problem, completely rejects the heavy armor of anxiety, and steps onto the battlefield with total, unwavering conviction.
So I want to leave you with a question drawn from these ancient texts. Tomorrow, when you wake up and the giant of fear or some seemingly impossible obstacle stands before you, what are you going to do? Will you sit in the camp and endlessly calculate the odds, totally paralyzed by the weight of your armor? Or will you anchor yourself in the unseen, pick up your simple stones, and run directly into the fray? The choice is entirely yours. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer.